The night hung heavy over Harborview, New Cascadia, thick with salt and the metallic tang of exhaust. Down at Rust Pier, the foghorns moaned, a sound that rattled the steel skeletons of the dormant cranes. Above, the glass towers of the Glass Line district bled red aviation warnings into the low clouds, beacons for planes that seemed too terrified to land. This was a city built on cold water and colder bargains, a place where shadows held more power than the watery daylight. Out of the unmarked granite facade of the North Star Authority building stepped Cade Vassallo. The hearing had been confidential, buried deep in the building's soundproof guts, a meeting between shadows and the quasi-federal agents who pretended to hunt them. To the city, he was two men, existing simultaneously. He was the untouchable CEO of Keelam Holdings, the logistics and shipping empire that owned the arteries of the port, and he was the whispered name that controlled the Aurelius Syndicate. The rumors said Cade Vassallo was carved from the local granite himself, that his heart was just another cold asset to be leveraged. The cluster of press, braving the damp chill for a glimpse of the phantom billionaire, sensed the shift in the air. They flinched as one. Digital cameras, which had been pointed aggressively at the reinforced doors, lowered. One reporter, newer or perhaps just stupider than the rest, raised his lens. Cade's gaze, flat and gray as the harbor water, slid over him. The camera snapped down as if struck. He did not speak. He did not have to. His silence was louder than any threat. 50 feet away, separated by a flimsy yellow security line that sagged in the mist, the real city continued its nightly grind. Mira Quell, 29 years old and running on 4 hours of sleep and high-octane coffee, was calming an elderly driver. His ancient sedan had died, steam hissing from the hood, completely blocking the exit lane of the secure plaza. She was the owner, operator, and entire staff of the Blue Ember Garage and Cafe, a massive retro-fitted tow truck that served artisan espresso and pastries from a side window while it worked. "It is just the alternator. Mr. Henderson, I promise," she said, her voice a warm patch in the damp cold, her hands stained with engine grease, gentle on his arm. "We will get you home." She gave him a smile, wide and genuine, meant only to reassure a frightened old man. Her 8-year-old son, Eli, sat in the tow truck's passenger seat, sketching superheroes in a worn notebook, the cab light illuminating his focused expression. He looked past the flashing amber lights of his mother's truck, past the nervous police officers, toward the silent, imposing man in the perfect suit who stood like a statue of iron. "Mom," Eli asked, his small voice cutting through the ambient city noise, "why does that big man look so sad?" The remaining cameras, desperate for any shot that was not the back of Cade's head, pivoted. They caught the juxtaposition in a single frame, the monolithic, shadowed billionaire frozen in his exit, and the woman in grease-stained overalls, bathed in the warm light of her coffee machine, smiling at a stranger. Cade heard the boy's question. He ignored it, dismissing it as irrelevant data. Mira gave the old man a final nod and moved to her truck, flipping on the heavy-duty warning beacons. She was hooking the chain to the sedan's axle, her boot resting on the official security perimeter. When the sound came, it was not the moan of the foghorns, but a high-pitched, localized whine. A delivery drone, unmarked and flying erratically, wobbled in the air above them. It dropped, its rotors spinning at a lethal speed, aimed directly for her. Mira looked up, blinded by its searchlight, her mind registering only failed motor and impact in the split second she had. Before she could even register the danger, a force hit her. Cade Vassallo had crossed the 20 yards separating them in 3 silent, impossibly fast strides, his arm, solid as a steel girder, clamped around her waist, pulling her backward. They tumbled against the solid flank of her tow truck, a tangle of expensive wool and worn denim. The drone slammed into the pavement where she had been standing. It shattered, its carbon fiber rotors skittering across the concrete like shrapnel. Mira gasped, adrenaline flooding her system, the smell of ozone and hot metal in her nostrils. She pushed back, looking up at the man holding her. His face was inches from hers, the notorious Cade Vassallo. He was not looking at the destroyed drone. He was looking at her, his expression a mask of controlled ice. "Are you hurt?" His voice was low, gravelly, impatient. Mira shook her head, her breath catching. "No, thank you. You—" She did the only thing she knew how to do when shocked or scared. She offered a genuine, slightly breathless smile of gratitude. It was not the calculated smile for Mr. Henderson. This one was raw, startled, and intensely real. Cade's eyes, the color of the deep channel at midnight, faltered. The ice did not melt, but it fractured. For half a second, the impenetrable dawn of Harborview looked utterly, completely lost. It was the first crack in the armor he had worn for a decade. The moment was broken by a sound that shook the very ground. A low, heavy thump rolled in from the east, rattling the glass towers. It was not thunder. It was the sound of the earth being broken. Atlas Quarry. Cade was instantly rigid, the moment of vulnerability gone. Sealed behind the ice, his phone vibrated once, a harsh, demanding buzz against his ribs. He released Mira, stepping back as he pulled the secured device from his pocket. The screen lit his face in a sterile white glow. The message was simple, terrifying. Protocol Virex breached. Across the plaza, Mira's own phone chirped with a different tone. A new job request. A late-night tow needed at the warehouse district, Pier 23. She quickly secured the sedan, waving to Mr. Henderson as another tow service, summoned by North Star Security, finally arrived. She needed this job. She checked on Eli, who was wide-eyed but calm, and climbed into her cab. Cade watched her. He watched her steady hands start the heavy engine, watched her navigate the massive truck back into the hostile city traffic, heading toward the darkest part of the port. He looked at his phone, then at the disappearing taillights of the Blue Ember. He turned to his lead security man. "Split the detail. You take the primary route home." "Sir, where are you going?" Cade's gaze was already fixed on the dark road she had taken, toward the forgotten, rusting docks of Pier 23. "I am following," he said, his voice flat. The woman who just made a room full of armed men hold their breath by smiling. Mira Quell's life was a symphony of competing alarms. The 6 a.m. timer for the espresso machine, the 7 a.m. reminder to get Eli's lunch packed, the constant low-level thrum of the tow truck's dispatch radio, and the hydraulic sigh of the tire jack. She was a mechanic by trade and a barista by necessity. Her day was a blur of patched tires in the rain-slicked alleys of the lower district and pulling double shots of espresso for overworked dockhands who needed the jolt in the middle of it all. She navigated the minefield of single parenthood. The brightest part of their week was Tuesday evening Eli's magic class at the Sparrow Community Hall. It was the one place he felt completely, incandescently himself, practicing sleight of hand with a focus that belied his 8 years. But a shadow hung over the bright spot. The bills from Eli's cochlear implant surgery 6 months prior were stacked on her dashboard, a mountain of white paper that seemed to grow heavier with every passing day. The surgery had been a miracle, opening his world to sound, but it had come at a cost that her combined garage and cafe income could barely touch. She knew the whispers. She knew where easy money could be found in Harborview, the Obsidian Circle, run by the notoriously volatile Draven Coil, offered loans that solve problems today by creating catastrophes tomorrow. Mira would rather sell the Blue Ember for scrap. She would work her fingers to the bone, patch every tire in the city, and serve coffee until her hands shook, but she would never, ever take their money. The dispatch call to Pier 23 had come with an urgent tag and a bonus. She needed that bonus. She left Eli with Mrs. Petrov, their elderly neighbor, promising to be back in time to take him to Sparrow Hall. Pier 23 was a graveyard of shipping containers, a maze of rusted steel under weak sodium lights. The call was for a smoking forklift, but as she pulled the blue ember to a stop, she saw the real problem, a 40-foot container, stenciled with recycled medical equipment and was sparking. Not a simple electrical short, but a rhythmic, pulsing spark from deep within the metal box. A sharp tang of accelerant hit her nose, cutting through the salt. This was wrong. She grabbed her extinguisher, but before she took 2 steps, the sparks erupted. A whoosh of chemical fire blew the container doors outward with a metallic shriek. The fire was bright white, unnatural, and climbing fast. Mira scrambled back, pulling her phone. She dialed 911. The line clicked. An automated voice answered. "Thank you for calling Harborline Dispatch. All circuits are currently busy. Please hold on." Busy. For an emergency call, she tried again. The same message. Panic. Cold and sharp, lanced through her. A black sedan, headlights off, glided into the pier complex, silent as a shark. Cade Vassallo stepped out, not in the tailored suit from the hearing, but in dark, functional cargo pants and a high-collared jacket. He was not alone. "Get back," he commanded. His voice was not a request. His men, moving with terrifying efficiency, bypassed the fire. They deployed tactical extinguishers, not with water, but with a fine, pressurized mist that choked the flames, smothering the chemical reaction in seconds. Cade himself triggered an emergency suppression system she had not even seen, hidden in the pier's infrastructure. Pipes in the concrete hissed, and a targeted fog enveloped the burning container. The fire died as quickly as it had begun, leaving only acrid smoke and the smell of burnt chemicals. Through the swirling mist, Mira stood frozen, her phone still in her hand. Cade walked toward her. His eyes, the same flat gray as the harbor, locked onto hers. He had seen the drone. He had seen the fire. And here she was, at the center of both. He stopped a few feet away, his presence a physical weight in the air. "This is not a coincidence," he stated. "I got a dispatch call," Mira said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline shaking her hands. "A smoking forklift. There was no forklift." One of his men, Orion, emerged from the container's blackened interior, holding a small, melted device in a pair of tongs. "Boss, decoy transmitter. It was wired to an incendiary. It was pinging a restricted network." Cade's jaw tightened. "Virex." Orion nodded. "But the burn signature, the accelerant, it is a textbook obsidian circle. They are getting sloppy." "No," Cade said softly, his eyes still on Mira. "They are not sloppy. They are framing us. They knew someone would respond." He looked at the smoking wreck, then back to her. "They expected Harborline Dispatch. They did not expect you, and they did not expect me." He saw the grease on her cheek, the exhaustion in her eyes, and the stubborn set of her jaw. "You and your son are no longer safe," he said. "We were never safe. Mr. Vassallo, this is Harborview. Keelam Holdings is hiring a dedicated night shift maintenance lead for the entire transport fleet. The position pays double your current rate and includes full housing benefits within the Keelam secure perimeter." Mira stared at him. It was not a job offer. It was a summons. A way to put her in a gilded cage. "I am not for hire, Mr. Vassallo. I do not sell my freedom." A flicker of something annoyance, or perhaps even respect, passed through his eyes. "Freedom will not protect your son when they decide you have seen too much. They set a trap for me and caught you instead. They will not let that loose end remain." He turned to his car, retrieved a small, black fob, and pressed it into her hand. It was heavy, made of milled aluminum. "This is not a cage. It is a shield. It is a Keelam-grade alert. If you or your son are in danger, you press this button. My men will be there in under 90 seconds, anywhere in the city." Mira looked at the fob, then at him. This, she could accept. It was armor, not chains. She closed her hand around it. As she drove away from the pier, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. Her phone buzzed. It was an email, a blast sent to all parents from the Sparrow Community Hall. "Dear parents and guardians, we regret to inform you that, effective immediately, The Helix Municipal Standards Bureau has revoked Sparrow Hall's operating license due to unforeseen zoning conflicts. All classes are canceled indefinitely. Mira's blood ran cold. The class, Eli's class, it was the one thing he loved, the one thing that was just his, canceled indefinitely because of a zoning conflict in a building that had stood for 50 years. It made no sense. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She looked in her mirror. 2 blocks back, a black sedan with no markings paced her, keeping other cars from getting too close, disappearing when she turned onto her street. Cade. He was opening a safe corridor home. She parked the blue Ember in its spot at the Bankside Apartments, the heavy weight of the Calum fob in her pocket. She looked at the email again. She looked at the spot in her mirror where the sedan had been. She was not just a mechanic anymore. She was a pawn on a board she had never asked to join. The Aurelius Spire was a shard of black glass piercing the Harborview sky, a fortress of logistics and power. Inside the penthouse command center, the only sound was the faint hum of servers and the click of Orion Vale's keyboard. The air was cold, recycled, and taut with tension. Cade Vassallo stood before a wall of holographic displays, flanked by his legal counsel, Svana Pike, and Orion, his systems architect. Pier 23 was not just an attack, it was an invitation, Orion said, his fingers flashing. A digital map of the port pulsed. This red icon is the container Mira Quell was dispatched to, the decoy. It was packed with chemical accelerant and a single Virex network transmitter, designed to burn hot and fast, and to frame Draven Coil. Svana Pike, sharp and pragmatic, crossed her arms, a frame job inside a frame job, and the real cargo. That is where they got clever. Orion said. He typed a command, and a second icon, blue, appeared. This shipment left the port 2 hours earlier, logged as recycled medical equipment, same as the decoy. It cleared customs on a Calum Holdings humanitarian fast-track charter, untouchable. Cade remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the blue icon's transit path. Show me its destination. Orion zoomed the map out, past the city limits, into the dense, unincorporated northern territories. The icon stopped, blinking over a blank spot on the map, an area the city grid officially ignored. It is registered as a defunct mining support depot, Orion said, but when I cross-reference thermal imaging from our Calum weather satellites, the image resolved. The blank spot was a compound, surrounded by high fences and heat signatures. The Virex system labor camps, Svana stated, her voice tight with disgust. They are using Calum Holdings as a humanitarian shield. They are trafficking people using your legitimate name. They made 2 mistakes, Cade said, his voice quiet, yet filling the room. First, they used my network. Second, they involved an innocent woman in their cleanup. He turned to Orion. They want to hide in our shadows. Fine. We will take the shadows away. Activate Project Lantern. Sir. I want sensors on every truck in the Calum fleet. Audio, thermal, seismic. Every driver, every route, every scheduled and unscheduled stop. We are going to map every dark corner Virex operates in. We will illuminate every blind spot. And who do we give this data to? Svana asked, the legal ramifications spinning in her mind. North Star is compromised. We give it to no one. Cade replied. We feed it anonymously to the Sentinel Bureau. Let the independent task force follow the data. As far as the world knows, the source is simply Lantern Zero. That is a declaration of war, Cade, Svana warned. They declared war, Cade said, when they set that fire at Mira Quell's feet. The retaliation from the underworld was swift. Within 24 hours, the digital ether was on fire. Draven Coil, enraged at the Pier 23 incident and sensing Cade's new aggression, launched a public campaign. The hashtag #HashFreeHarbor exploded across social media, fueled by Obsidian Circle money and amplified by genuine citizens terrified of the port's consolidation. News feeds filled with grainy photos of Cade Veselo, casting him as the monopolist, the silent shark swallowing the city's livelihood, Calum holding stock, usually as stable as the granite beneath the spire, dipped 5%, then 8%. Cade ignored the frantic calls from his board. This was the price of admission. Mira felt the shockwave without knowing its source. She was scrubbing the espresso machine, trying to explain to Eli why his magic class had been canceled. When her phone rang, the caller ID read Harbor Renewal Council. A man's voice, smooth as aged whiskey, flowed through the speaker. Am I speaking with Miss Mira Quell of the Blue Ember Garage? This is she. Miss Quell, this is Pastor Grange. I am the chairman of the council. I was so distressed to hear about the unfortunate situation at Sparrow Community Hall. A true loss for the children. Mira's hand paused on the steel. It was very sudden. These bureaucratic errors often are, Grange said, his tone dripping with false sympathy. The Helix Municipal Standards Bureau can be terribly rigid, but the council, well, we have a certain influence. We believe in protecting our community spaces. I am holding a review next week. I'm quite certain I could persuade the Bureau to reverse its decision. Mira waited. She knew this tone. It was the sound of a bargain being offered. Of course, Grange continued, the Bureau is more inclined to help those who show they are aligned with the community's best interests. They look poorly on businesses that associate with dangerous, destabilizing elements. What elements are those? Pastor. Men who attract fire, men who bring the shadows of the syndicate to our doorsteps. The council and I would be very grateful if you would publicly distance yourself from Cade Veselo. A simple statement, confirming the Blue Ember stands with the people of Harborview, not its oppressors. Do that, and I can almost guarantee Eli's class will be restored by Friday. The air in the truck felt thin. He was using her son's happiness as a bargaining chip. My garage is open to anyone who needs a repair. Pastor, Mira said, her voice dropping 20 degrees. I do not choose my customers based on rumor, and I do not respond to blackmail. She ended the call. The next morning, she found the response. It was not a phone call. It was a violation. The smell of aerosol paint hit her before she even reached the Blue Ember. Scrawled across the side of her truck, over her hand-painted menu of coffee and services, were 2 words in dripping red paint, Widowmaker's Pet. The insult was visceral, aimed not just at her, but at the ghost in Cade Veselo's past, his late wife. Mira felt a surge of nausea. This was not a turf war, it was desecration. She was standing there, shaking with a cold rage, when his black sedan slid to the curb. Cade got out. He did not ask what happened. He did not look at her. He looked only at the red paint, his face carved from ice. He said nothing. He walked to the Blue Ember's storage bay, pulled out her can of industrial solvent and a stack of clean rags, and began to work. He scrubbed in a focused, methodical silence, erasing the hateful words. Mira watched him, the most powerful man in the city, cleaning graffiti off her truck at dawn. As he worked on the last letter, she saw it. His hand, the one gripping the rag, was trembling. It was a slight, violent tremor, the only sign of the seismic rage he was containing. In that moment, she understood. He was not unfeeling. He was drowning in feeling, and had spent a decade building a dam to hold it back. When the last smear of red was gone, he neatly folded the soiled rag and replaced the solvent. This will not happen again. His voice was flat. Before Mira could answer, the door of their apartment building creaked open. Eli, in his spaceship pajamas, padded onto the sidewalk, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He saw Cade, the sad man, standing by the truck. Eli walked straight up to him, his small face serious. He reached into his pajama pocket and pulled out a small, rectangular piece of yellow construction paper. "This is for you," Eli said, holding it up. "It is a ticket for my magic show." Cade froze. He looked down at the offering. On the ticket, in red crayon, Eli had written "Admit 1," and below that, in wobbly letters, valid with a smile. Slowly, as if his joints were stiff, Cade Vassallo knelt, bringing himself down to the boy's eye level. He took the small paper ticket. He did not, could not, produce the required payment. But the ice in his eyes thawed, just for a second, revealing the man buried beneath. "I will keep this safe," Cade said, his voice rough. He stood, and with the care of a man handling something priceless, he slid the crayon-drawn ticket into the inner breast pocket of his tailored jacket, a piece of homemade sunshine against the darkness. The alert from Project Lantern was a single, insistent red pulse in the dead zone of Cade's command center map, Atlas Quarry. It was a digital ghost, a signal where none should exist. Simultaneously, Mira's dispatch radio crackled, bypassing the usual human dispatcher. It was an automated, high-priority request, one heavy-duty recovery. The client Keelam Holdings, the location a service road deep inside the Atlas Quarry complex. The listed issue, one transport truck, axle deep in mud. Systems failing, the pay was triple the standard rate, an offer she could not refuse. She kissed Eli goodnight, leaving him safely with Mrs. Petrov, his sketchbook, and a promise of waffles for breakfast. The heavy fob Cade had given her felt cold and dense in her pocket. The road to the quarry was a crumbling ribbon of asphalt, eaten by weeds and forgotten by the city. The blue ember's headlights cut through the fog, illuminating the rusted "Condemn No Trespassing" signs. As she navigated the truck around a collapsed barrier, her mirrors flared. Two black sedans, identical, materialized from the mist behind her. They had no front plates, and their windshields were tinted to an illegal, mirror-like black. They were not following. They were closing. Mira's stomach tightened. This was not a rescue job. This was the trap Cade had warned her about. One sedan accelerated, its engine screaming, and slammed into her rear steel bumper. The metallic shriek sent a violent jolt through the cab. The heavy tow truck fishtailed on the loose gravel. The second sedan pulled alongside, its driver invisible, trying to force her off the narrow road and into the quarry's deep, water-filled pit. Mira's hands did not tremble. They gripped the wheel, her knuckles white. They thought she was just a mechanic. They were wrong. She saw her escape the dark, square maw of an old ore transport tunnel, carved into the granite cliff face, barely wider than her truck. It was a gamble. She slammed her foot on the accelerator. The blue ember's powerful diesel engine roared in response. She aimed straight for the tunnel, the sedans matching her speed, boxing her in, ready to pin her against the rock. At the last possible second, just before her front bumper hit the stone, Mira yanked the heavy-duty handbrake, locking the massive rear wheels simultaneously. She spun the steering wheel hard left. It was a maneuver born of a different life, a life before tow trucks and espresso, a life spent as a stunt trainee in the deserts outside Los Angeles. The massive 12-ton truck executed a perfect 180-degree reverse spin. Its rear end slid, screaming into the tunnel entrance, the metal side scraping the stone with a deafening wail. The blue ember, now facing its attackers, came to a halt, a solid steel barricade blocking the entire tunnel. The two phantom cars, caught completely by surprise, had no time to stop. They smashed into each other, a chaotic wreck of steaming metal, shattered glass, and deployed airbags. Mira took one shaky breath, her heart hammering against her ribs, and killed the engine. A new sound split the air, not the whine of a failing engine, but the high-pitched thrum of advanced turbines. A sleek, matte black mini helicopter, looking more like an urban assault vehicle than a corporate transport, descended from the sky. It landed on the flat top of the quarry ledge above her. Cade Vassallo emerged, Orion at his side. They had been tracking her. As they moved to the edge, another drone, this one larger and clearly weaponized, rose from the wreckage of the cars to meet them. Cade did not flinch. He raised a rifle-like device and fired. A net of conductive silver filaments shot out, enveloping the drone. It sparked violently, sputtered and dropped from the sky, neutralized by the localized electromagnetic pulse. Cade rappelled down the sheer quarry wall, landing as silently as a shadow beside the steaming wreck. He moved past it, into the darkness of the tunnel where Mira was checking her truck for damage. "They were not chasing you," Cade said, his voice echoing in the stone darkness. "They were protecting this." He pointed his tactical flashlight deeper into the tunnel. There was the stuck Calum truck. It was not stuck in mud. Its side panel was wide open, revealing not medical supplies, but a humming bank of networked servers, cooled by streams of liquid nitrogen, the mobile heart of the Virex network's local operations. "They are rebooting the system." Orion's voice crackled over Cade's earpiece. "More Obsidian crews are inbound. Ground transport, estimated arrival, 3 minutes." Cade pulled a small, adhesive device from his jacket, a lantern beacon. "We need to plant this on the primary server. It will map their entire network before they can initiate the data wipe." He moved toward the truck. A shot echoed from the tunnel entrance. Bullets sparked off the granite wall. Dangerously close. Obsidian had arrived. On foot. "Cover me," Cade said to Mira. "With what?" Mira yelled, ducking behind the solid steel of the blue ember. Cade tossed her a heavy-duty road flare from her own supply kit. "Create a diversion. Now." Mira ripped the cap and struck the flare. It hissed to life, a blinding, intense magnesium-white light. "Hey!" she screamed, hurling it toward the entrance. The shooters shouted, instinctively raising their arms, their night vision ruined. In that flash of white, Cade lunged. He slapped the beacon onto the server rack's main junction. A small light on the device turned green. Data acquisition initiated. "Orion, we are compromised. We need an exit. Lock down Cranespan Bridge." Cade grabbed Mira's arm. "We are leaving, through the back." They burst from the tunnel's far end, scrambling into the blue ember's cab. Cade took the passenger seat, not bothering with the door. "Drive," he ordered. "East toward the water. Fast." Mira floored it. The truck's engine screamed in protest as it tore through the quarry's unpaved back roads, heading for the industrial waterfront. Cade put in a black earpiece, handing the other identical bud to her. "What is this?" she yelled over the engine's roar. "Trust. Put it in. Orion, you have the wheel. Give her directions." "Hard right at the junction in 3, 2, 1 now." Orion's voice was unnervingly calm in her ear, a stark contrast to the chaos. Mira spun the wheel, the heavy truck groaning onto the steel approach for the crane span, an aging drawbridge that crossed the deep industrial channel. Behind them, 2 more Phantom cars, faster models, had joined the pursuit, their headlights closing the distance. "They are gaining, Cade," Mira said, her eyes locked on the mirror. "Just keep driving," Cade said, his attention fixed on his phone. "The bridge is raised," Mira shouted, slamming the brakes. Ahead of them, the center span was up, a dark gap of churning black water separating them from the other side, a dead end. "They are boxing us in," Cade said, his voice level. The Phantom cars screeched to a halt behind them, blocking their only retreat. Men in dark tactical gear piled out, weapons raised. "Cade," Mira's voice was tight with alarm. "Wait for it," he said. With a deep, metallic groan of massive gears, the drawbridge in front of them began to lower. "How?" Mira whispered. "I own the bridge," Cade said simply, as if stating the weather. "Orion, lift it again as soon as we clear the span." "Floor it, Mira," Orion ordered in her ear. Mira did not hesitate. She slammed the accelerator, and the blue ember thundered across the connecting steel plates just as they locked into place. The moment her rear wheels cleared the gap, the bridge behind them began to rise again, lifting swiftly, creating an impassable barrier. The Obsidian crew was left stranded on the other side, watching them disappear into the city. Adrenaline sang in Mira's veins. It was a terrifying, electric feeling, a shared breath in the middle of chaos. A fragile thread of trust pulled taut between them. An hour later, they were parked at Bankside. The city was quiet again. The blue ember was scarred with new dents, and a spiderweb crack had blossomed across the windshield. Misses. Petrov opened the apartment door, and Eli launched himself into Mira's arms, burying his face in her neck. "You were gone a long time, Mom." "I know, baby. I am here now." She held him tight, breathing in the comforting smell of his hair, her hands shaking slightly. Cade stood back, near the cab of her truck, his hands deep in his pockets. He watched the small, fierce circle of their family, an observer in the warm yellow light from the apartment hallway. He looked, Eli's word, sad, or perhaps just intensely lonely. Mira settled Eli back inside, promising him breakfast for dinner, and walked back out. Cade was already turning to leave, melting back into the shadows. "You should not just disappear," she said, her voice stopping him. He looked at her, the mask of the dawn firmly in place. "You are safe. The job is done." "You are bleeding," she noted, pointing to his hand, grazed raw from the quarry wall. "And you look frozen. My machine is still hot." She did not wait for an answer. She went to the Blue Ember's service window, her movements practiced and calming. She pulled 2 insulated mugs, steamed milk in the steel pitcher, and added 2 generous pumps of dark chocolate. She handed one to him. "What is this?" he asked, his voice rough as he took the warm mug. "Cacao. My son says it fixes most things." Cade looked at the steam rising from the mug, then at her. The adrenaline had faded, leaving them both raw and exposed. "The way you handled that truck," he said, his voice low, "the 180 spin, you were not always a mechanic." "And you were not always a logistics CEO," she countered, taking a sip. The hot chocolate was a shock of sweetness. "We all have a past, Mr. Vassallo." "Cade," he corrected her. "Cade," she repeated. She leaned against the scarred side of her truck, the silence suddenly comfortable. "That was insane. The bridge. You own the bridge." A sound escaped him. It was quiet, rusty, as if the mechanism was unused. It was a short, sharp laugh, gone almost as soon as it appeared. Mira felt her own tension break. A real, genuine laugh bubbled up in her chest, mixing with his. It was the first time they had truly smiled at each other, without danger or fear between them. The sound echoed in the quiet street, a strange, warm noise in the cold Harborview night, smelling of pine-scented cleaning solvent and the first hint of salt rain. The truce forged over hot chocolate was brief. The real world returned the next morning in the form of a manila envelope, delivered by a humorless courier. It was not a bill. It was a summons. The North Star Authority cordially invited Mira Quell to their headquarters to clarify testimony regarding the incidents at Pier 23 and Atlas Quarry. The words aiding in the transport of illicit materials were buried in the 3rd paragraph. It was not an invitation. It was a threat. Pastor Grange and his allies were making their move. Cade did not send a bodyguard. He sent Svana Pike. They met in a sterile, soundproofed Calum conference room high in the spire. Svana, a vision in sharp gray wool, slid a single sheet of paper across the polished obsidian table. "This is your statement," Svana said, her voice devoid of inflection. "You were hired for a standard recovery. You were caught in a developing situation. You were in fear for your life. You drove the truck at the direction of Mr. Vassallo, who was acting as a stabilizing presence. You saw nothing. You know nothing." Mira read the clean, precise, and utterly false statement. It was a lie of omission, designed to shield Cade and erase her. She pushed it back across the table. "I cannot say this." "Miss Quell, this is not a social engagement. This is language for a questioning chamber. Agent Halberd at North Star is not looking for the truth. He's looking for a lever. If you tell him what you actually saw, you will be charged as a co-conspirator. You will lose your son." "And if I read this," Mira countered, her voice quiet but unyielding, "I lose myself. I will not lie. I will tell them exactly what happened. The fire, The ambush, the servers in the truck, it is the only way I know how to speak." Svana studied her, a flicker of an unidentifiable emotion in her sharp eyes. "As you wish. But understand this, you are walking into a room of men who do not care about your integrity. They will twist it." The interrogation room was beige and smelled of stale air. Agent Jace Halberd, the man in charge, offered a politician's smile. "Mira? May I call you Mira? We are just trying to understand what a civilian mechanic was doing at the center of 2 major syndicate incidents." Mira took a breath and told the truth. She told him about the dispatch call that felt wrong. She told him about the 911 call that went to a busy signal. She described the fire at Pier 23, how it burned white and fast. She described the ambush at Atlas Quarry, the phantom cars, the high-tech drone, and the servers hidden in the Calum truck. Halberd's smile never wavered, but his eyes grew cold. "That is a fascinating story, Mira, a bit cinematic. You are describing a war zone, yet you drove away without a scratch. You expect me to believe Cade Vassallo, the most dangerous man in this city, just happened to be there twice to play hero." "I am not asking you to believe anything," Mira said steadily. "I am telling you what I saw." Halberd leaned back, tapping his pen on his notepad. He scoffed. "His presence is a liability. He has compromised a multi-agency investigation. We had high hopes for Project Lantern, and he just walks in and sets the whole thing on fire by playing bodyguard." The air in the room seemed to vanish. Mira froze. Project Lantern. The name Cade had spoken in the spire, the name Orion had used, the name she had never mentioned to anyone. Halberd realized his mistake. His smile vanished, replaced by a flat, cold stare, but it was too late. Mira understood the chill she felt. Halberd was not investigating the fire. He was angry that Cade had shown up to his own party. "Project Lantern," Mira repeated, her voice soft. "That is his. Is not it you knew about the servers?" She stood up, her chair scraping on the tile. "I'm not a suspect. I am just a piece of his operation you did not know about. This interview is over." She found Cade later that night. He was not in the spire. He was standing in the shadows across from the Bankside apartments, a silent sentinel watching her building. He was waiting for her. "You used me," she said, storming across the street. There was no fear in her voice now, only a cold, vibrating rage. "You knew they would come for me. The dispatch to the pier, the call to the quarry. You put me and my son in the middle of your war." "I put a shield around you," he countered, his voice rough. "The alert fob, the safe corridor. I never let them get close." "That is not the same. You use me as bait, as a trigger. What is Lantern Zero?" Cade went completely still. He studied her face in the dim streetlight. Halberd slipped. It was a statement. "Why?" Mira demanded, her fists clenched. "Why all of this, the sensors, the data, risking your entire company? This is not just business. It is about that graffiti. Is not it Widowmaker's pet?" The dam of control he maintained at all times did not just crack, it shattered. He turned on her, and the ice in his eyes was gone, replaced by a pain so deep it was almost black. "Her name was Elena," he said, his voice raw, stripped of all its command. "She was not just my wife. She was the light. She did not die in a boat accident. She was taken 3 years ago." Mira's anger vanished, replaced by a sudden, cold dread. "Virex," Cade continued, his voice barely a whisper. "They use the Obsidian Circle's shipping routes, a blind spot in the harbor manifests. She was on a Calum transport, one I was not watching closely enough. They took the entire ship. By the time I found it, it was abandoned off the coast. She was gone, lost at sea during the transfer." He looked at his own hands as if they were foreign objects. "So yes, this is about her. I put infiltrators in North Star, like Halberd, who has obviously been turned. I funded the Sentinel Bureau from the shadows, Project Lantern. Lantern is my promise. I am going to burn Virex and Obsidian to the ground, not for revenge, To stop them from taking any more families, I am going to expose every shadow they hide in." Mira stared at him, the sound of the city fading away. He was not a cold-blooded Don. He was a survivor, driven by a loss she could not imagine. He was breaking every rule, risking his empire, to keep another family from feeling what he felt. "You are trying to save everyone," she whispered. "I'm trying to save one," he said, his gaze fixed on her. The moment was broken by a text alert on Mira's phone. It was from the Sparrow Hall parent group. Pastor Grange, enraged by Mira's defiance and North Star's failure to secure her, had doubled down. He had opened a new campaign to moralize the harbor. He was filing a second permanent injunction against Sparrow Hall, this time citing its proximity to syndicate activity and demanding it be seized by the city. Eli's stage was not just closed, it was about to be taken away for good. That evening, Eli was devastated, but defiant. He refused to give up. He took his small, fold-out magic table to the center of the Bankside apartment courtyard, under a single, flickering streetlight. He began to practice. He was working on his main trick for the upcoming neighborhood festival, the Bankside Lantern Night. He called it Making the Fear Disappear. It involved a small, dark red silk scarf, his fear, which he would vanish from his hand, only to make it reappear as a bright, hopeful yellow paper flower. Mira watched him from their apartment window, her heart aching. The festival was in 2 days. It was supposed to be his big debut. "It is not safe, Eli," she murmured to the glass, knowing he could not hear her. She felt a presence. Cade was across the street in his usual shadows, watching. He saw the small boy practicing magic in the dark. He saw Mira watching from the window. Her phone vibrated. It was him. "He should not have to lose his stage," Cade's voice said, low and determined. "The festival will happen." "Grange will send obsidian," Mira whispered, her throat tight. "They will use it as an excuse to shut us down, or worse." "Let them come," Cade replied. "He wants to perform. He performs. I will protect that stage. Mira, I will protect him with every light I have." The Bankside Lantern Night was an act of communal defiance. Against the cold harbor and the encroaching shadows, the neighborhood had strung hundreds of paper lanterns. They swayed from apartment balconies, crisscrossed the narrow streets, and lined the rusting iron fence of the waterfront, casting a soft, warm glow. The air smelled of wood smoke, roasted nuts, and the nearby salt sea. At the center of the courtyard, on a small plywood stage, Eli Quell meticulously arranged his props on a velvet-covered box. He was nervous. Mira could see, but his excitement was a brighter light than any lantern. He stepped forward, his small voice amplified by a portable speaker. "For my first act—" He never finished the sentence. A sharp click, followed by a low-frequency hum, washed over the courtyard. It was not a single bulb blowing. It was the entire grid, the lanterns, the streetlights, the apartment windows. The festive lights on the blue ember all extinguished at once. The world plunged into an oppressive, heavy darkness, thick with the smell of ozone, an EMP. Mira's blood ran cold. "Eli!" The crowd murmured, confused and suddenly afraid, but in the sudden blackness, Mira saw them. They were not confused. They were shadows detaching themselves from the alleyways. 4 dark figures, moving quickly and purposefully toward the stage, toward her son. They were not here to watch the show. They were here to take the magician, to leverage Mira's silence. Mira reacted instinctively. She was not a fighter, but she was a mother. She grabbed a heavy metal tray of cooling pastries from the blue embers counter. "Fire, fire in the cafe," she screamed, hurling the tray into the side of her own truck. The crash of metal was deafening in the sudden silence. It was a diversion, a desperate attempt to pull their attention, even for a split second. The shadows paused, momentarily distracted by the new, sudden threat. It was all the time Cade needed. He was not in the crowd. He was already in motion. "Orion, now!" Cade's voice cut through the dark, Not a shout, but a command that carried. A deep rumble answered him. The engine of a massive Calum Holdings transport truck, parked silently on the adjacent street, roared to life. This was no ordinary truck. It was a mobile power station, part of the Project Lantern fleet. High-intensity LED work lights, the kind used to illuminate entire container yards, flared to life. Mounted on the truck's roof, Orion, working from the cab, channeled the truck's massive battery array into the independent grid Cade's team had secretly run under the pavement that afternoon. The courtyard was flooded with harsh, brilliant white light, brighter than the lanterns had ever been. The crowd gasped, shielding their eyes. The shadows, caught in the sudden, surgical glare, flinched like creatures of the dark. On stage, Eli was bathed in the spotlight. He had not moved. He was staring at the dark figures, now frozen and exposed. Cade and two of his men, appearing from the darkness, formed a solid wall between the stage and the intruders. The Obsidian crew, realizing they were outmatched, outnumbered and exposed, melted back into the alleys. Their mission failed. Mira rushed toward the stage, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Eli, are you okay? Are you hurt?" Eli looked at the men who had been coming for him. Then he looked at the new, bright lights. He took a shaky breath. "It is part of the show. Mom." He turned back to the stunned crowd, his voice high and clear. "I call this one," making the fear disappear. He held up the small, dark red silk scarf, his fear. He waved his hand. He fumbled the first time, his hands shaking, but he recovered. He closed his fist, whispered the magic words, and opened his hand. The red scarf was gone, in its place. He held a large, bright yellow paper flower, catching the industrial light. The Bankside residents, sensing the invisible danger that had just passed, sensing the small boy's impossible courage, burst into a wild, cathartic cheer. An hour later, the crowd was gone. Eli was asleep in his bed, clutching his magic wand. The Calum truck was gone. The only lights were the standard street lamps, flickering back on as the EMP's effects faded. Mira was in the blue ember, her back against the cold steel of the espresso machine. The adrenaline had left, leaving a deep, bone-rattling chill. She was shaking, not from the cold, but from the realization of what had almost happened. She heard the garage's side door slide open. Cade stood there. He did not move into her space. He did not offer platitudes or apologies. He just stood in the doorway, the scent of the cold night rain clinging to his jacket. He had sent his men home. They were alone. He watched her tremble. Then, slowly, he held out his hand, palm up. It was not a command. It was not an order. It was an offer, a choice. Mira looked at his hand, the same hand she had seen shake with rage while cleaning the graffiti. She pushed off the machine. She did not take his hand. She stepped past it, moving into his space, and pressed her forehead against the solid wool of his jacket, right over his heart. She inhaled. He smelled of the night, of ozone, and faintly of the cacao they had shared. She felt the steady, slow thump of his heartbeat under her cheek. Her own breathing was ragged, still hitched with fear. His arms came up, circling her, pulling her secure. He was solid rock in her storm. They stood like that for a long time, her ragged breath slowly sinking with his steady rhythm. "You are safe," he murmured, his voice a low vibration against her hair. Mira tilted her head back, looking up at him. The mask of the dawn was gone. His eyes, in the dim light of the garage, were just his. They were gray and deep and filled with a profound, aching vulnerability that mirrored her own. A slight smile, barely a lift at the corner of his mouth, signaled the new reality. "You did not run," he whispered, his thumb brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "You gave me a reason to stay," she whispered back. He lowered his head. The kiss was not the desperate, frantic collision she might have expected after the night's terror. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was a question, and an answer, and a promise, all in one. It was a discovery. His lips were firm, cool from the night air, but they warmed against hers, moving with a deep, searching tenderness. It was a kiss that spoke of loss, of loneliness, and of a profound, startling recognition. One of his hands slid from her shoulder, down her back, pressing her closer. It was not an act of possession, but of grounding. He held her as if she were the only solid thing in the world. His thumb moved in slow, reassuring circles at the base of her spine, calming the last of her tremors. Mira's hands fisted in his jacket, pulling him closer still, wanting to erase the last inch of space between them. She pressed herself against his chest until she could feel his heart beat, not just with her ear, but with her whole body. The garage, with its smell of machine oil and the new rain, faded away. There was only the warmth, the connection, the surprising safety she felt in the arms of the most dangerous man in Harborview. A small, insistent tapping came from the apartment door connecting to the garage. "Mom, did you lock the door?" They broke apart, but not far. They were breathless, their foreheads resting against each other. A small, shared laugh, startled and slightly embarrassed, escaped them both. It was warm and real. "1 second, baby," Mira called out, her voice stronger than it had been all night. Cade looked at her, his eyes clear. The vow, when he spoke it, was absolute. "I will not leave you alone again. Mira, not in this." Mira nodded, her hand still resting on his chest, over his heart. She felt the truth of his words. "I know," she said, "but we do this the right way. No more using me as bait, no more shadows. We bring it all into the light." The EMP device from the lantern night did not just leave ozone in its wake, it left a digital signature in the command center of the Aurelius Spire. Orion Vale had spent 36 hours chasing that signature through the city's complex power grid. "They were clever," Orion announced, his voice echoing in the quiet room. Cade and Svana stood behind him, watching the holographic map. The device was powered by a rolling bypass, drawing energy from 3 different municipal substations, impossible to trace. "But," Svana Pike prompted, she knew his methods. But they had to pay the technician who installed the bypass. The payment was routed through a discretionary account. A new window popped up, showing a transaction ledger, the Harbor Renewal Council's Community Electrical Safety Fund. "Grange," Cade stated. The name landed like a chip of ice. Pastor Grange was not just an opportunist, he was a key player. He was the one who had tried to shut down Eli's class. He was the one who had sicked obsidian on them. Svana stepped forward, her mind already assembling the strategy. "They are attacking us on 2 fronts, Cade, the street, with Coyle's thugs, and the legislature. With Grange's committees, our response must be twofold." "Covert and overt," Cade agreed. "Exactly. Orion," Svana commanded. "You will package every piece of data we have, the financial link from Grange to the EMP, the server data from Atlas Quarry, the decoy transmitter from Pier 23, and the last 3 months of Project Lantern's findings on Virex. You will encrypt it and deliver it anonymously to the Sentinel Bureau. We need the independent investigators to hold the uncorrupted truth before Northstar tries to bury this." "Done," Orion said. "That is the covert part," Svana continued, turning to Cade. "Now, the overt. We take Project Lantern public, but we give it a new name. We call it the Lantern Oath." Cade watched her, intrigued. "A publicity stunt." "A strategic illumination," Svana corrected. "Draven Coyle and Grange are using the Free Harbor campaign to paint you as a shadow, a monopolist swallowing the city. We will combat that lie with radical transparency. Kelum Holdings will publicly pledge the Lantern Oath. We will announce that, effective immediately. Our entire logistics fleet is streaming its positional and manifest data to a public-facing server, 24 hours a day. We will show the citizens of Harborview exactly where our trucks are and prove we have nothing to hide. We will invite the city to watch us." Cade allowed himself a rare, cold smile. "We will light up the entire board. If Obsidian or Virex try to use our routes for their trafficking, the whole city will see them try. The announcement of the Lantern Oath hit the city network like a shockwave. It dominated the local news. A bold, confident move that stunned Calem's competitors and infuriated its enemies. It also triggered a panic. Agent Jace Halberd at the North Star Authority, feeling his leverage over Mira slipping, made a desperate call. "Miss Quell, you need to come in. Immediately." Halberd's voice was stripped of its false friendliness. "This oath is a public relations trick, and it does not change the facts. We have new satellite evidence placing your truck at Atlas Quarry before the ambush. We know Vassallo forced you to act as an accomplice. This is your last chance. Full immunity for you and your son. You testify against him." Mira was quiet for a moment, the memory of Grange's oily voice fresh in her mind. "It is funny you should mention my son. Agent Halberd, I have a recording I think you will find interesting." "What recording?" Halberd snapped. "It is Pastor Grange, the head of your beloved Harbor Renewal Council, offering to miraculously save Eli's magic class if I agreed to publicly denounce Cade. He tried to blackmail a single mother using her child's happiness. Since your agencies work so closely together, I thought you should hear it. I am sending the audio file to your superiors and to the Sentinel Bureau. Have a nice day." She ended the call, her hands steady. Draven Coil's response was, as always, blunt and brutal. He could not fight their data, so he created his own reality. A new video, seemingly sourced from a leaked security camera, flooded the #Free Harbor hashtag. It was grainy, time-stamped from a year prior. It showed a tall man in a dark coat, his build and walk eerily similar to Cade's, tossing a small object into the open bay of the Harborview Community Hospital's medical warehouse. The man walked away. Seconds later, the warehouse erupted in flames. The news anchors ran with it immediately. Shocking new footage implicates Calem CEO Cade Vassallo in the devastating hospital fire. "It is a deep fake," Orion stated in the Spire, analyzing the footage. "A very good one. The metadata is forged. The timeline is manipulated. They are painting him as a monster who burns charity hospitals." Cade watched the faked inferno, his face unreadable. He was cornered. They were not just attacking his business, they were attacking his soul, twisting his past, using the very thing he sought to protect the city's welfare against him. That evening, Mira brought Eli to the Spire. Cade insisted on a security check, wanting them close. Eli, oblivious to the media firestorm, saw Cade staring at the silent, looping video of the fake fire. The boy walked up to the billionaire, his small face serious. "That is not you." Cade looked down, his expression heavy. "How do you know?" "Your walk is wrong," Eli said simply. "You walk like you are listening to everything. That man just looks angry." Eli reached into his pocket. He had taken the yellow crayon-drawn Admit 1 ticket Cade had saved. With meticulous care, Eli had cut and folded it, transforming the simple rectangle into an intricate, tiny paper lantern. He pressed it into Cade's large hand. "It is an escape hatch," Eli explained. "For my magic tricks, you always need a way out, just in case, so you do not get trapped." Cade stared at the tiny, fragile paper lantern. "Don't forget the exit." He looked from the boy to Mira, whose eyes were filled with a fierce, unwavering trust. He closed his hand around the paper lantern. He had made his decision. "Svana," he called, his voice clear and resolved. "The North Star Authority hearing, the one about the port, it is public, is it not?" "Yes," she said, confused. "But we are not attending. We are filing a motion to dismiss." "No," Cade interrupted. "I am done fighting from the shadows. They want a public spectacle. We will give them one. I am testifying. I am going to answer their questions about that hospital fire. And then I am going to talk about Pier 23 and Atlas Quarry and Pastor Grange and the Virex network. I am putting everything on the table." He was betting the entire game on this one. Public move. Inspired, Mira knew she had to fight her own battle. Cade was fighting for the city. She had to fight for its heart. She called an emergency meeting of the Sparrow Hall parents. "They are not closing the hall because of zoning or safety," she told the small, worried group. "They are closing it to silence us, to take our community, so they can build more empty towers." She organized them. The Sparrow Parents Volunteer Team was not a protest group, it was an investigative unit. A father who worked as a city surveyor pulled the original blueprints, proving Sparrow Hall's zoning was grandfathered in 50 years ago. A mother who was a data analyst tracked the safety complaints and found every single one originated from shell companies owned by Draven Coil. They compiled their findings into a single, undeniable report. The community, seeing the hard evidence of the corruption, exploded. The #Free Harbor hashtag was hijacked. #Save Sparrow Hall and #Grangelide began to trend. The weapon of public opinion, so carefully aimed by Grange, was now turning back on him. Pastor Grange, a man who built his reputation on public piety, understood the theater of power. The Sunlight Masquerade Gala was his masterpiece, a $300 a plate fundraiser to reclaim the soul of Harborview. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. The city's elite, their faces hidden behind elaborate gold and white masks, gathered in the Grand Athenaeum, sipping champagne and bidding on art, all to fund the very man who was choking the life from the city's heart. Grange was raising money to fight the shadows while dealing with them under the table. He had one weakness, a paranoia that Orion Vale had discovered Grange did not trust digital records. He kept a physical ledger, a detailed, analog account of his true dealings, locked in his private office on the 3rd floor. Two figures moved through the waltzing crowd, indistinguishable from the other masked guests. Cade was imposing in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, his mask a simple, severe piece of unadorned obsidian. Beside him, Mira was a revelation. Svana Pike had provided a dress of deep, sapphire blue velvet that clung to her strong frame. Her hair swept up, her mask was silver, shaped like overlapping wings. To any observer, they were just another power couple. As they reached the edge of the polished dance floor, the orchestra shifted, the music slowed, then reignited into the dramatic, precise rhythm of a tango. It was the only way across the floor without drawing attention. Cade turned to her, his gloved hand extended. "May I?" Mira placed her hand in his. "You lead." He guided her onto the floor, and in one fluid motion, they were part of the music. They did not just dance, they communicated. Where Cade expected hesitation, he found perfect intuitive partnership. Mira, her body conditioned by years of demanding physical work and the muscle memory of her stunt training, mirrored his every move. They spun, they dipped, they moved as a single entity, their steps sharp and confident. "The office is 1 floor above us," Cade murmured, his lips brushing her ear, his breath warm. "Orion is initiating the camera loop in 20 seconds. The lock on his door is a standard commercial model," Mira whispered back, her body arched against his, their gaze locked. "The one on the safe is a 7-pin tumbler. My clutch has the picks." They were close, their chemistry a controlled, silent fire. It was not the soft warmth of the night they shared cacao. It was the focused, white-hot heat of a welder's torch. They were a team. They were a weapon. They finished the dance near the grand staircase, breaking apart with a formal nod as the music swelled and vanished into the shadows of the mezzanine. The office door was easy. Orion had the electronic keypad disabled. The heavy steel door to the inner records room was Mira's territory. She pulled 2 thin, steel tools from her elegant clutch. They looked like minimalist sculptures, but they were a tension wrench and a hook pick from her own toolbox. Cade stood guard, watching the hallway. Mira worked, her touch sensitive, translating the faint clicks of the mechanism through the steel. In under 30 seconds, the lock clicked open. The room was dark. Cade closed the door as Mira found the light, and there it was. Not a server, but an antique. Fireproof safe. "He really is analog," Mira breathed. Cade turned to the safe. "That one is mine." He spun the dial. his movements precise, his ear close to the metal, listening to the tumblers fall in a sequence Orion had recovered from a vendor's manifest. The heavy door swung open. Inside, beneath stacks of false manifests, was a single, leather-bound ledger. Cade placed it on the desk. He adjusted his tie pin. A simple platinum bar, a tiny pinprick lens gleamed. He opened the book. It was all there. Payments from Obsidian Circle, routed through the Harbor Renewal Council, land transfer agreements for the port, ceding city property to dummy corporations, and the centerpiece, the architectural proposal for the Fog Tower Urban District, a luxury high-rise development to be built on the bulldozed land of Sparrow Community Hall. Cade meticulously turned each page, the tiny camera capturing every line. "What a pretty picture!" The voice came from the doorway. Both Cade and Mira froze. Draven Coyle stood there, his mask hanging from his hand. He was not in a tuxedo, but in his usual dark, street-functional clothes. He held a small, silver remote. The silent alarm. One press, and this whole party comes crashing down on you. He sneered at Mira. "He cleans you up nice, mechanic, but you are still just the help." Cade moved, placing himself between Mira and Draven. "This is not your fight, Coyle." "You brought the fight to me when you burned my container on Pier 23, Draven hissed. "And now you are stealing from my partner." Mira looked at Draven, then at Cade. She saw the calculation in Cade's eyes, the way he was measuring the distance, the options. She saw Draven's thumb move on the alarm. She was not the bait. She was the other half of the plan. She stepped out from behind Cade. "He is right," she said, her voice clear and strong. She looked at Draven. "It is a lovely party, but the guest list is terrible." Before Draven or Cade could react, she walked past Draven, out of the office, and strode toward the grand staircase. Draven, stunned by her audacity, hesitated, left with Cade. Mira did not run. She walked with purpose, descending the stairs, her sapphire dress flowing. She walked straight toward the main stage, where Pastor Grange was mid-speech, pontificating about civic virtue. She did not wait to be announced. She walked up to the podium and took the secondary microphone. The orchestra, confused, faltered. The music died. "Excuse me, Pastor," Mira said, her voice booming across the stunned, silent ballroom. "My name is Mira Quell. I own the Blue Ember Garage, and I would like to personally thank you for trying to trade my son's community center to the Virex network." A collective gasp swept the room. Grange's face, beatific and kind moments before, turned to stone. In the records room, Draven heard the commotion. He turned back to Cade, his pistol now in his hand. "She is dead, and so are you." Cade was already moving. Draven fired, the sound absorbed by the heavy door. Cade was not there. He was moving along the mezzanine, heading for the control booth. Draven pursued, breaking onto the balcony, his pistol raised at Cade's fleeing back. Vassalo Draven roared, taking aim. Cade stopped. He turned slowly, his hands raised, his back to the ballroom. He was trapped. "Do not do it, Draven," Cade said, his voice calm. "It is over." Draven centered the pistol on Cade's chest. Cade looked past him, at the giant LED screen that formed the backdrop for the stage, the screen now showing Mira's defiant face. "You are right," Cade said. He lowered his hands and tapped the device on his wrist. "It is time to turn on the lights." The massive screen behind Mira and Grange flickered. Mira's face vanished, replaced by a high-resolution, full-color photograph of the first page of Grange's ledger, the payment from Obsidian Circle. The crowd screamed. Cade tapped his wrist again. The next page, the land transfer. Grange lunged for the microphone, his face purple with rage. "Lies, forgeries. That woman is a terrorist. That man on the balcony is Cade Vassalo. Seize him." The ballroom doors burst open. Agent Jace Halberd and a dozen North Star agents flooded the room, their weapons fanning out, securing the exits. The guests panicked, tearing off their masks. Grange pointed a trembling finger at Cade, who was now walking calmly down the stairs, his hands in plain sight. "Arrest that man. He is the source of all this." Agent Halberd strode onto the stage, his face grim. He walked past a stunned Mira. He walked straight up to Pastor Grange. "Pastor Grange," Halberd announced, his voice amplified by the hot mic, "you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and aiding a known human trafficking organization." Grange stared, his mouth opening and closing. "What on whose authority?" Halberd looked out at Cade, his eyes filled with a cold, professional fury. "By the authority of a superseding warrant filed 10 minutes ago by the Sentinel Bureau, based on evidence provided by an anonymous source known only as Lantern Zero." In the pandemonium of the Athenaeum ballroom, as agents slapped cuffs on a sputtering Pastor Grange, Draven Coyle moved like a phantom. He did not run for the main doors. He slipped through a catering corridor, vaulted a back fence, and vanished into the waterfront alleys. He was a creature of the shadows, and Cade had just destroyed his last hiding place. 2 hours later, Draven proved he was most dangerous when he had nothing left to lose. The #Free Harbor hashtag, which had been cheering the arrest of Grange, suddenly switched to a new, terrifying broadcast. The feed was raw, shot on a handheld phone. It showed Draven Coyle's face, slick with rain, his eyes manic. Behind him, through the glass of a lantern room, the storm-tossed waves of the harbor mouth churned. He was in the Peregrine Light, the abandoned, 100-year-old lighthouse that guarded the channel. "You like the lights so much." "Cade." Draven screamed into the phone, the wind howling around him. "You want to expose everything, let us light up the whole sky." The camera panned down. On the floor was a laptop, wired to a complex trigger assembly. "This," Draven snarled, "is wired to the pressure sensors at the Mariners Field gas storage, the whole west side of the city. I flood the network. It blows. I want Cade Vassalot, unarmed, alone, on the causeway in 1 hour. You trade me your king, or I turn Harborview into a crater. Your move, Lantern Zero." The Spire Command Center became a pressure cooker. The air was thick with the shriek of the approaching storm zephyr and the frantic arguments of men in suits. "It is an acceptable loss," a hard-line North Star commander stated, his face grim. "We trade Vassallo. 1 man for the safety of 200,000. It is the only tactical solution." "That is not a solution. It is a sacrifice," Svanna Pike shot back, her voice cutting. "You hand Cade over, and you validate the threat. Draven Coyle will own this city until his next whim. You do not negotiate with a bomb." "It is the easy solution." "The easy solution is what got us here," Svanna countered. Mira stood beside Cade, watching the tactical map, her mind working with the cold, clear logic of a mechanic. She saw the lighthouse. She saw the fuel depot. She saw the digital static the storm was causing. "He is bluffing," she said. The room went silent. "He's not a martyr," Mira continued, her voice steady. "He's broadcasting. He still thinks he can win. He needs that #Free Harbor feed, that terminal he is using. It is his strength, and it is his single point of failure. If we take down the broadcast, we take down the detonator switch." "He will be watching the causeway," Cade said, following her logic. "He will expect a ground assault." "Exactly," Mira said. She turned to Cade. "He is expecting you. He will not be expecting me." She looked at Orion, who was already mapping the lighthouse's ancient architecture. "This requires a 2-pronged attack. Cade, you handle the fire. That detonator. It must be signal-based." Orion nodded, his fingers flying. "It is. He's piggybacking on the old tidal sensor network. He will flood it with a data rain, a series of pings that overload the sensors and trip the failsafe, triggering the explosion. It is an old Virex protocol." "Then you stop the rain," Mira said to Cade, her gaze locked on his. "You take a fast boat. You use the Lantern Network's counter-frequencies. You get to the depot and you intercept that signal. You stop the trigger while we stop the hand on it." "While we do," Cade asked, his voice dangerously low. "While Orion and I climb," Mira stated, leaving no room for argument, "we go in the dark. We scale the lighthouse from the water. We are not soldiers. We are infiltrators. He will be watching the front door for you. He will never see us coming." The wind howled, rattling the glass of the spire. It was no longer a plan. It was a desperate gamble in the teeth of a hurricane. As if sensing the tension, Mira's tablet chimed, a secure video message from Mrs. Petrov. Eli, in his pajamas, appeared on the screen, his face serious. "Mom," he said, holding up his small magic wand, "I was practicing the great distraction trick. It is for the bad guys. See?" He pointed the wand dramatically to his left, his small voice earnest. "You make them look here, but you are too smart for them, Mom. Because the real magic—" He grinned, opening his other hand to reveal the red silk scarf he had supposedly vanished. "The real magic is happening here. They are looking at the wrong hand. Good luck." Mira's eyes met Cade's. A coded message from an 8-year-old. "Draven is looking for Cade. He's looking at the wrong hand. He will not see me." The decision was sealed. The Calum Stormboat, a sleek, black interceptor, idled in the churning water, its engines a low growl against the storm. Mira zipped into a dark, waterproof tactical suit, finished checking her harness. Cade stopped her at the gangplank, the wind tearing at them, whipping her hair across her face. He pulled her into the shelter of the bulkhead, shielding her from the driving rain. The noise was deafening wind, waves, and the nearby thrum of Orion's stealth insertion craft. "This is not a risk I want you taking," Cade yelled over the roar. "This is not a risk I am asking permission for," she shouted back, her eyes meeting his, fierce and unafraid. He grabbed her arms, the mask of the dawn gone, his face etched with the raw fear of a man who knew what loss felt like. "Mira," he said, his voice rough. He pulled his own secured satellite phone from his pocket and pressed it into her hand. "Keep this channel open, always. I need to know you are there." The line clicked open, a fragile connection in the digital storm. He put his free hand on her cheek, his glove rough against her skin, his thumb stroking the bone. "If I fall, Mira," he said, his voice dropping, forcing her to lean in, "if I do not make it, I want you to smile. Smile like you did that first night at the hearing, the real one. It will help me remember the way home." Mira's heart felt like it stopped. She saw the man, not the legend, the man who was terrified of the dark. She grabbed the front of his jacket, her grip like a vice. "Listen to me, Cade Vassallo," she commanded, her voice cutting through the hurricane's shriek. "You do not fall. I do not fall. We are the anchor. We come home, together. That is the only acceptable outcome." She pulled him down, crushing her lips to his. It was not a tender kiss. It was hard, fast, and desperate. A brutal transfer of will and hope that tasted of salt water and adrenaline. A promise sealed in the heart of the storm. She broke away. "Now go! Stop the rain!" Mira turned and ran for Orion's boat, disappearing into the spray, leaving Cade to face the fire. The lantern room of the Peregrine Light was a glass cage suspended in the hurricane. Rain and spray hammered the windows as Draven Coil, his face a mask of manic fury, stared at Mira. "He sent you," Draven laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "The Dawn, hiding behind his mechanic. He is smarter than I thought." "Cade is busy," Mira said, her voice steady, her hands dripping cold seawater onto the metal floor. Orion was one level below, working on the broadcast junction. "It does not matter," Draven sneered, gesturing to the laptop. "You are too late. You think this was ever about Grange? Grange was a fool, a puppet. The real money, the real power, is the Consortium Noctis. They wanted this port. They paid me to burn it, and they paid Grange to renew it. And now, thanks to Cade, they get to buy the ashes for pennies on the dollar." A shout came from below. "Orion feed is cut. He is dark." Draven's smile widened. He did not even look at the laptop as its screen went black. Amateurs. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, hard-wired device with a single red button, a backup trigger, analog and independent. The network was just noise to keep you busy. This one is simple. I press. Mariner's field blows. He lunged for the button. Mira met him halfway. She did not aim for the device. She aimed for him. She tackled him with the full force of her body, a collision of bone and desperation. They crashed against the thick glass of the lantern, then stumbled backward, locking them in a frantic struggle. He was stronger, his fingers digging into her arms, trying to get the trigger free. They tumbled out of the lantern room and onto the narrow, slick metal of the spiral staircase. Draven slammed her head against the iron railing. Mira's vision flared white with pain, but she held on, her mechanic's grip locked on his wrist. She saw a heavy coil of old mooring rope, thick and stiff, looped on a peg. As they fell down another turn of the spiral, Mira grabbed the loose end. She did not try to hit him. She looped it, quick and practiced, around his arm, using his own momentum against him, pulling the rope tight against the central spindle of the staircase. They both fell, skidding down the last 10 feet. Mira crashed hard onto the landing, her ribs screaming in protest. Draven was brought up short. His arm yanked violently by the rope. He was trapped, bruised and aching. Mira crawled to him. She wrenched the trigger from his numbed fingers and threw it into the dark, churning water far below. Meanwhile, Cade was fighting a different battle. The Calum stormboat pitched violently, the waves like liquid mountains trying to swallow them. The data rain is not a single signal. It is a cascade, Cade yelled, fighting the wheel. He's using the old tidal sensor network to create the overload. He tracked the primary signal, the source of the cascade. It was not at the depot. It was in the water, 100 yards from the concrete perimeter. It is a buoy. He anchored the transmitter to buoy L7. The timer on his console showed 90 seconds until the cascade reached critical mass. The storm was too violent to bring the boat alongside. Cade grabbed the lantern counter-frequency device, a waterproof cylinder, and strapped it to his chest. He looked at the active satellite link, the open channel to Mira. "Hold on, Mira," he whispered. He dove over the side, into the freezing, chaotic blackness of the ocean. He fought the current, the cold stealing his breath. He surfaced, his lungs burning, and saw the buoy, rising and falling on the waves with the last of his strength. He hooked one arm around it, tore the device from his chest, and slammed its magnetic base onto the buoy's access panel. He hit the activation switch. The device sent a focused, high-frequency pulse, a digital choke, flooding the signal's protocol. The data rain did not just stop, it collapsed. The fail-safes at Mariner's Field, which had been moments from tripping, reset. The ignition was strangled. As Cade clung, exhausted, to the buoy, the lights of North Star cruisers flooded the depot. The hardline commander strode to the water's edge. "Vassallo, you are detected. You are under arrest for domestic terrorism." Cade began the long, cold swim toward shore, his limbs heavy. But as he reached the slick concrete, a different set of vehicles, dark and official, screeched to a halt, the Sentinel Bureau. "Commander, stand down," a Sentinel agent ordered, stepping into the floodlights. "By order of the Federal Oversight Committee, Mr. Vassallo is a protected witness. He's Lantern Zero. We are taking custody of him and the evidence he just secured from Consortium Noctis." Back at the lighthouse, Mira had tied Draven Coil to the central column. She stumbled back up the spiral stairs, every step in agony. She stood in the lantern room, her body a map of bruises, and watched the storm begin to break. And then she saw it. The massive, sweeping light of the Peregrine Light, which had been dark for a decade, flared to life, cutting a hole in the retreating rain. Orion had rebooted it. It was a signal. Cade was alive. The depot was safe. She heard a heavy, wet footstep on the stair. Cade appeared, his clothes torn, his skin pale and blue with cold. He was soaked, bruised, and breathing hard. They stared at each other for a long second. Two survivors in the eye of the storm. Then they moved. It was not a kiss. It was a collision. He met her in the center of the room, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her so tight she could not breathe, burying his face in her wet hair. She clung to him, her hands fisted in his ruined jacket. They stood, holding each other up, trembling. He pulled back just enough to press his forehead against hers, his hot breath a cloud in the cold air. "We made it," he whispered, his voice raw. The next morning, the city was clean, washed by the storm. At the emergency hearing, the evidence was undeniable. The gala ledger, the recording of Grange's blackmail, and the full, unencrypted logs of Project Lantern painted a complete picture. Grange and Draven, their connections to Virex and the Consortium Noctis exposed, were indicted. The Harbor Renewal Council was dissolved. Sparrow Community Hall, the center of the fight, had its license permanently and publicly restored. That afternoon, Cade Veselo held a press conference. He announced the dissolution of the Aurelius Syndicate's shadow operations. Kylum Holdings, he stated, was being reformed. It would be renamed the Lantern Humanity Logistics Fund, a non-profit entity governed by a community board, dedicated to providing safe and transparent transport. He publicly agreed to 5 years of full civilian oversight from the Sentinel Bureau. Weeks later, the Blue Ember Garage and Cafe was gone. In its place stood the Blue Ember Station. It was a permanent building, a state-of-the-art garage combined with a warm, bright cafe. A sign in the window read, "Now hiring single-parent mechanic apprenticeship program." That evening, Eli Quell stood on the fully restored stage at Sparrow Hall. It was the neighborhood's make-up lantern night. He was performing his new signature trick, flying over the lighthouse. For his finale, he made a small paper lantern float in the air. "Magic is not about hiding," he told the cheering crowd. "Light is what we share." Inside the new cafe, Cade watched Mira wipe down the polished wooden counter, the smell of fresh coffee mixing with the scent of pine from the new rafters. He walked up to her, holding a small black box. He did not kneel. He opened it. Inside, Eli's yellow crayon ticket, valid with a smile, was perfectly preserved, encased in thick, smooth glass hanging from a simple silver chain. Cade took it out and fastened it around her neck. "This is my vow," he said, his voice soft. Mira's hand went to the charm, feeling its warmth. Cade held out his hand. She took it, and there, in the middle of their new beginning, they began to slow dance. Outside, the great beam of the peregrine light swept across Harborview, a steady, constant circle, a new navigation system for a city, and 2 hearts finding their way home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from. Please, leave a comment below, share your thoughts, and let us connect. Remember to subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Story, and like this video. It makes a huge difference. And if you enjoyed this story, please support us by hitting that hype button so more people can discover it.